I don't believe what I just saw. I think we all need to breathe. Fred Katz here following the Clippers. Absolutely ridiculous, 126 to 121. Game 7 win over the Golden State Warriors. Man, what a game. So let's get to talking about this in Los Angeles. Let's talk about this 5-point win, Game 7 win, moving on to the second round to face the Oklahoma City Thunder is Patrick James. Patrick, how you? Is your heart okay right now?
Sorry, I blacked out for a little bit. Did they win?
It's very hard to tell. And in Alaska is Seth Part. Now, Seth, how are you doing? Are you alive right now? We're like in a okay form.
We're doing okay. I may have. It's early enough that I didn't have to worry about waking the neighbors up with my yelling at the TV. So, doing well.
Let's talk Clipper basketball. Clippers win 126 to 121. This game's kind of impossible to analyze, so I'm not even going to analyze it. I'm just going to ask. Patrick, I'm going to ask you right off the start. Is this the best Clippers win in team history?
I was thinking about that right before the show. I don't know if, for sheer value of spectacle, it tops the Game 1 in Memphis in 2012. That was just amazing. I mean, what can you even say about that? Because it was so unlikely, and it seemed to come out of nowhere. This was a way better game than that game. I mean, it was back and forth. There were amazing shots on both sides. Both teams were great. There was so much context and backstory and back and forth. I would say yes. I'd say yeah. This is the best game in Clipper history.
It's kind of hard to disagree with that. I think the second half of that game especially was as spectacular as this first round has been. I think that second half was probably the highest quality basketball between two teams we've seen all postseason. And I think I'm the only one. I'm not the only one who feels a little bit wrung out after just all the, like you said, the back and forth and the crazy plays both ways and banked in threes and spectacular and ones and yeah. So good win on to the next round. Start 0-0, right?
Yeah. The thing about this game though that I think is going to be super memorable is we got the birth of Blake Griffin coming up big in the playoffs when it matters. And I think maybe for just at least the next few years, we can kind of get rid of all of the narrative that existed around Blake Griffin going into this season and for part of this season. I know it changed throughout the course of the year. We heard people on national broadcasts praising Blake Griffin throughout the year. After his performance, especially in the fourth quarter of this game tonight, it's just done. He's one of the best players in the NBA, and that's how it is. He had a great few games this series, and he came up biggest when it mattered most. That's cool.
I think a nice microcosm, just feeding off you, Patrick, is if you go back to Game 3 against San Antonio in the second round in 2012, Blake had a killer game. I think he had like 28 and 16 in that game, but the Clippers ended up blowing that huge 20-point lead to San Antonio. They were down 2-0 in the series, and you figure they could have cut back, and they could have cut that to 2-1, and all of a sudden, hey, maybe they have a chance. They're still in the series at least. All of a sudden, they blow that lead. They're down 3-0, and now all of a sudden, Blake comes up big in a Game 7, and fortune goes the Clippers' way. So I don't know if that means anything basketball-wise, but I think that's just a nice way to feed the narrative of Blake kind of turning it around. Blake had some amazing plays. Actually, before we get into this, I want to weigh in and say I think I was probably more excited in Game 1 against Memphis in 2012 because just as a Clippers fan, I think I was more excited because it was kind of the first year of the Chris Paul year. We didn't really know what the ceiling was because we didn't have as good of a feel on the team because it was the first year together. It was the lockout year. I think in some ways, I think it kind of depends on the way you look at it. I mean, tonight with this game, it was great players making great shots. It was Curry making 4-point plays and DeAndre just making amazing defensive plays in the final 5 minutes and Blake making passes and dunks and Chris Paul just being unbelievable. In that first game, it was kind of the guys you wouldn't expect making those plays. But that's what made that game exciting, right? It was the Nick Young threes and the Reggie Evans defense and the Reggie Evans game-winning layup. And so it kind of depends on which kind of excitement you're looking for. If you're looking for the unexpected excitement versus just sheer greatness at its highest. I mean, the Warriors played an amazing game tonight. But let's talk about some of those amazing plays, because there were probably like 4 or 5 SportsCenter top 10 worthy plays in the last 5 minutes of this game. Seth, what was the play of the game that you thought, if you could just watch one play over and over again, that's the one I'm going to pick?
I don't even know if it's the play. I think it's just Blake reverse somersault kipping up after his and one coming down the lane. Just like, not even the shot itself, just the kind of rolling backwards and springing to his feet. Just and like, you kind of expect him to go ta-da and take off his hat and pull out a rabbit and there we go. So I don't know, the Florida Gulf Coast style lob to DeAndre. When they broke the press and said, we could pull this out and we're just gonna throw the lob here, and because that's the right play to make now, and it just looked so kind of, I want to say Blake looked calm, making a ridiculous play, and not ridiculous in terms of crazy, but ridiculous in terms of amazing, in kind of a what should be a super high pressure spot. So, you could talk about Chris Paul going for kind of in the middle of the fourth quarter, kind of going take over, getting to the bucket at will. JJ Redick hit a big jumper down the stretch. DeAndre's block on Steph Curry that led to the alley-oop from Redick to Blake. Do I have to keep going, or am I just going to recount?
I'm going to take over. I want to talk about DeAndre's block on Steph Curry because. Right. In some of the other losses, the games that the Warriors really took control, there were kind of defining moments where Curry was able to get to the hoop like that and get it up over the outstretched arms of DeAndre Jordan a couple times and go high off the glass. He did it once tonight, and I think he actually did it 3 times, maybe on like 3 out of 4 possessions in the 40-point win in Game 2. When it was just like, I'm going to keep scoring even if the team is losing. And so this was kind of cool because the Clippers had pretty good luck guarding Steph Curry, generally speaking, with their they stuck to their strategy throughout most of the series, like hedging hard, and like that strong side defense was in effect. So they were able to limit his 3-point kind of deadliness pretty effectively throughout the course of this series, relatively speaking. But they never really had an answer for that, like when he drives to the hoop and just throws it up high off the glass. And this looked like one of those instances where he was just going to score, and DeAndre Jordan's outstretched arm getting the ball and then keeping it in play and getting it like for that Griffin lob was kind of like a game-defining sequence where the Clippers. You expect that from Chris Paul, the like, I'm taking over the game, we're not losing. It was cool to see it from DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin. We're going to win. And, you can do that and still not win, but it was cool to see those players play with that confidence and bravado.
Yeah, I can't believe, Patrick, you mentioned earlier that kind of there's a narrative of, all of a sudden Blake came up big in the playoffs, right? And we saw this progress throughout the year, and we saw people nationally and locally and everybody else say Blake Griffin has become a legitimately great player now. We saw a similar transformation this year with DeAndre Jordan. And DeAndre Jordan in this series, the first half, he was not great tonight. Throughout this series, he's had games, Game 2, Game 3, and Game 5, defensively, he was just nothing short of a monster. And the thing about DeAndre is the people who still criticize his defense, and they're out there and they're still prevalent, and their arguments are legitimate, are criticizing DeAndre for when DeAndre is down. But when DeAndre is playing at his peak level, DeAndre is a top 5 defender in the league, I think, and I don't think anybody's going to argue against that. And games 2, 3, and 5, DeAndre played at his peak level for 48 minutes, basically. Tonight, DeAndre played at his peak level for the entire fourth quarter, I would say, or at least the second half of the fourth quarter when he was just unbelievable in crunch time. And I think the narrative with him has really changed. They said in the broadcast now that DeAndre is the first guy in a 7-game series in the history of the league to have 18 rebounds and 4 blocks in 3 separate games. That's amazing. He's really coming up. He came up so huge in this series. Seth, how big is that just to see from DeAndre? Because he's a guy who really struggled in the playoffs too, and he was really, if just on the DeAndre scale, I'm not calling him the best defensive center in the league or anything, but just on the DeAndre scale, the guy was incredible in this series.
Well, I mean, when we previewed this series, we talked about how he was kind of the most important Clipper for this series, just because he was the guy who we knew, if he was playing well, would always have an advantage with Bogut being out, and so it was. And so to some extent, you have to take it with a little bit his kind of numerical production with a grain of salt, not to throw cold water on it. But the fact that we knew he was going to have an advantage, the fact that he was able to take advantage of that, and in the games you're talking about where he was locked in defensively, he was in many ways the dominant player on the floor, and that was kind of the swing between various games of the series was whether Golden State was able to put him in tough situations defensively. So that he was ineffective and basically took himself out of the game. And, especially the second half and the fourth quarter tonight, he was, like you said, he was locked in. He was, getting rebounds, protecting the rim, as one of the best rim protectors in the league should. And over the course of the season, he hasn't been at the very best, but as you said, at his best, he's right there. But at the same time, that's also, the team was also just more cohesive in the second half defensively. So he kind of had simpler tasks to stop the ball and not have to worry about the guy behind him because the rotations were just crisper and better. I know I've gotten a little far away from the question, but he was pretty good tonight, and certainly in all four games they won. He was pretty dominant.
Leave it to Seth. I ask him about DeAndre Jordan. He starts talking about the Clippers' rotations. I ask him what the best play from the game is. He gives me 7 of them. So what are you going to do? I think there's one thing I do want to follow up on, though. You said that DeAndre, you got to take kind of the rebounding numbers and the block numbers maybe with a grain of salt because Andrew Bogut's not there. And, that's obviously true. Andrew Bogut is an excellent defensive center in his own right, and a good rebounder, and he's just a wonderful player, and clearly the Warriors would have been a different team had they had him. That said, I think the stuff that DeAndre rebounds every night. I mean, he had a double-digit rebounding streak that went, I think, 30 games or 31 games this year, something like that. And so he's going to rebound no matter what. I think no matter which center he's going up against. What I think is impressive is that when DeAndre is not great, it's because he's late on his rotations or he's rotating to the wrong spot. And that doesn't necessarily have to do with going up against size. Actually, you can argue that when you're going up against a team where Draymond Green is playing center and they have that much stretch, it's even harder to know to rotate to the right spot because guys are so much more spread out. So I think in that right, you can say that in some ways this was a little bit harder for DJ, right, Patrick?
You could say that in that sense and in that sense only, because the advantage.
Patrick disagrees. He's just trying to be polite.
No, I agree with you in the sense that, look, in the first half, Green got a handful of open 3 attempts, and Iguodala had a bunch of open 3 attempts also in the second half, and they were situations where Jordan was the person who needed to be rotating onto him, and he was there-ish, he was making a gesture out there, but he's caught in a real weird situation because if he goes out and shows hard on that catch and shoot, then he's leaving the Clippers without their best rebounder near the hoop, and he might commit a foul. It's not his natural kind of. He's not used to contesting a 3 without making contact, so he's probably wisely not making contact on a couple of those, but the Warriors made some wide open 3s courtesy of Draymond Green because of that matchup thing. That said, the rebounding numbers kind of speak for themselves.
And just to follow up briefly, early in the series, for the first 6 games of the series, I haven't looked at the stat sheet tonight, so I don't know how many offensive rebounds the Warriors had, but they were offensive rebounding at an extremely high rate in a large part because of what you're talking about with those weird rotations where all of a sudden DeAndre Jordan is closing out to a shooter at the arc or in the corner or something like that. So and that I think that really in many ways played into the Warriors' advantage, even though you'd expect Jordan to dominate the boards. They were able to when they had success in the series. and for times in the first half tonight, even they were able to pull him away from the basket, and that left kind of the basket area open both for drives and offensive rebounds. And so I agree with you that was kind of a difficult decision. They put him in, like, do I stay and protect the rim and rebound, or do I chase the shooter? And that was, and in the second half, I think they were able to, the Clippers were able to figure out ways to really allow him to stay home more, and that, I think, was a big part of his ability to both rebound and kind of protect the rim.
Right, and Golden State had 9 offensive rebounds tonight compared to the Clippers' 7 offensive boards on the game. So, and a lot of those came early. A lot of those were just David Lee, just kind of working it on the boards as well. Something we have to talk about, because we were critical of him last night. Chris Paul, he's had the hamstring injury. He's playing hurt. All of a sudden, Chris Paul comes out. Let's see this: 8 for 15 from the field, 22 points, 14 assists. His defense was I thought, pretty incredible, and that has nothing to do with the 4 steals. I mean, the way that he was fighting through screens with Curry when he was defending him, the way that he was sticking with him every time they blitzed the pick and roll, he was so good. Really, throughout this series defensively, he hasn't gotten enough credit, I don't think, defensively. I think a lot of people have talked about his struggles offensively, which were very legitimate, and we talked about it in the show after Game 6, but he was so good defensively tonight, and in the second half, the guy was unbelievable. I think we talked about in Game 6, can the Clippers win a series if Chris Paul is not the best player on the floor in any given game? And I think tonight, Chris Paul was probably the best player on the floor. Patrick, does this at least kind of massage those worries that we might have had after Game 6 about his hand and his hamstring heading into the Oklahoma City series?
Maybe a little bit. I think you still have to be kind of concerned, because, look, it's Game 7. It's, win or go home. It wouldn't take like a huge leap to imagine that Paul might have played through more pain tonight than in Game 6, but there's more incentive, and you're able to summon more of yourself in this situation than you are on the other night. He was absolutely fantastic tonight. And despite the fact that Curry had 33 points, Paul, Paul had him shooting 7 for 17, and was just hounding him on defense and making Curry work for everything he got. So yeah, Paul was fantastic both on offense and on defense, and I guess you could be encouraged by that, but you still have to wonder, does this flare up and down? I don't know. Russell Westbrook is a different cover than Steph Curry.
Russell Westbrook is a very different cover, and Russell Westbrook is somebody who historically has hurt Chris Paul. Let's transition to the Oklahoma City series. Right after this question, though, we do have a question from We Are One Clips. DeAndre Jordan, he is. Would you consider him to be the MVP for this series? I guess I'll just ask that in the more broad sense. Seth, who would you say? I mean, they don't give out MVPs for first-round series, but who would you say, if they did give out MVPs, would be deserving of MVP in this series for the Clippers?
It's hard to argue against DeAndre being the MVP. I think you look at the common factors between the games they won, and it was like we said earlier, him kind of dominating the paint on both ends of the court, and that was especially with the lineup the Warriors have out there, that was kind of the big thing that had to happen. Had to have the size matchup of the Clippers overwhelm the quickness and shooting matchup of the Warriors, and in the 4 games that they won, he did that. So Paul was up and down a little bit. Blake was up and down a little bit, but in the games they won, DJ was the guy who got it done. And I think that, like you said, in the second half tonight, especially, he really, it's kind of funny to say after you give up 120-some points that your defense won you this game, but at the same time, I mean, their defense in the second half was enough to allow the offense to take over, I guess.
Yeah, and something to note here is that sometimes you can look at a point total and say this is bad defense. Tonight was incredible offense on both sides. I mean, both teams were playing unbelievable offense. They were, like you mentioned, Patrick, that Curry had 33 points, but Paul played great defense. Curry had 33 on 17 shots. he was hitting outrageously difficult shots. Like, he was hitting Steph Curry shots. That 4-point play was insane. I have no idea how that went in the basket. Exactly, and it was 16 for 16 from the line with all those fouls. So, like, some of those shots that were made, I mean, Iggy was banking in threes. I mean, this was just one of those nights where there was a magnet on the bottom of the rim, and around, I should say, on the bottom of the net, and the ball was the opposite end of that magnet, and it was going to be hitting the bottom of the net no matter what. And you look at the Clippers' top 6 offensive players: Griffin, Barnes, Jordan, Paul, Redick, and Crawford. Every single one of them shot better than 50% from the field tonight. So it was pretty amazing offense, I'd say, on both sides of the ball. And we got to see a Jamal Crawford 4-point play, which everybody needs to see. With the amount of 4-point plays we've seen in the postseason, I think there are 14 now. How could Jamal Crawford not get in on the party and have one, right?
There 14, and I think were there 3 other threes where the shooter got fouled tonight and the ball didn't go in. So I think that, like, there was 5 3-pointers tonight where there was a shooting foul. Do I have that right, or only 4?
Yeah, Blake had one on Iggy again. He's got to stop on those weird touch fouls. Yeah. Patrick just put in our chat. The Golden State offensive efficiency for the game was 119.8, and the Clippers was 124.8, which is like, that's total craziness. Like, that is 15 more points per 100 possessions than the Clippers averaged in the regular season, which, to give you a perspective, is way bigger than the difference between the best and worst offense in the league. So it's like, that is an outrageous difference with how much offense there was. Let's move on to Oklahoma City, because this is big now. First round series, but I don't think the Clippers are anywhere near satisfied with one first round win after the season they had. We have to remember they were actually the favorites, and reasonably so, in this series. A lot of people in the comments section asking. So, what would you say, Seth, is the biggest concern, or should be the Clippers' biggest priority heading into the Oklahoma City series, which, by the way, starts Monday night? I don't know if they've announced times yet, but it's scheduled for Monday night.
I mean, given the quick turnaround, I mean, the fact that even though both teams played a Game 7, Oklahoma City's was both earlier and far less stressful in the second half. So, in addition, Oklahoma City, aside from, like, the silly headlines about Kevin Durant, hasn't had the stuff that's gone on around the team in the series that this one had. So I think the biggest worry right away is to and it's a real worry in my mind, is to not kind of, I don't want to say no show, but not kind of have a letdown in game 1 and have one of those games where they lose by 12, but it was never really a game in the second half. I mean, that's kind of my that's my biggest worry right now. Again, playing the role of wet blanket, but yeah.
Patrick, you are you at a rave right now?
I have no idea what just happened. Why am I red?
Patrick is like on so much acid right now that you can't even handle it.
Not that much.
Patrick is Glenn Davis's shot chart.
That's a great Halloween costume.
There's no red light here. I don't know what's happening here. Should I leave the chat and come back?
No, I preferred you to answer this.
There it is.
You're normal now. You're normal now.
Woo!
I was gonna make a joke about you being a well-read man, but let's talk. Let's just, you guys maybe I should leave the chat after that. Is that better?
Yeah.
Patrick, Kevin Durant, simplest terms, how the heck did the Clippers cover Kevin Durant?
I remember, I believe, when Matt Barnes had strep throat, and they were talking about, like, making sure that he's just really close to Kevin Durant before the Oklahoma City game at the end of the regular season. That'd be a good start. Look, I think you have to be encouraged that the Clippers faced this guy, Steph Curry, in this series, and he's someone that the league tends to think of as unguardable because his best shot is from very far away. And the Clippers were able to, over the course of the series, do a relatively respectable job of not letting him totally eviscerate them. And they didn't do it by one guy shutting him down, although Chris Paul did play good individual defense. It was a team effort. And I guess you could, by extension, imagine that they can come up with some sort of plan to contain Durant similarly. But this is just a long way of saying I have no idea what you do against. I mean, Tony Allen did a great job, but they don't have that amazing on-ball individual defender to throw at him, So I think it's going to be a lot of different looks, to be honest. It's going to be a lot of different looks, and they just want to make sure that he doesn't get the ball in rhythm. And you want the defender to be moving Durant somewhere rather than Durant getting to his spot, because it doesn't matter if you can test if he gets to the spot he wants to go to.
Right. If you're waiting for Tony Allen to guard Kevin Durant, well, guess what? There's only one team in the entire league that has anyone who's anything like. I mean, I guess Iguodala is pretty amazing, but I consider Iguodala's strength more off ball than on ball, even though he's incredible on ball. I mean, Allen might be the best guy in the whole league when he guards at guarding Kevin Durant. He's incredible. And Seth, he had the best that quote. What was that quote again that he had post game? That was incredible.
They were asking him about the suspensions and the injuries and stuff like that, about if he had any what ifs about the series, and he said if ifs were fifths, we'd all be drunk, which is it's a spectacular quote. The grindfather. If he's not your favorite, he should be. So.
He's always a great quote. So Steph, let me ask you this: you're a good X's and O's guy. The Clippers blitzed the pick and roll like crazy in this series. Russell Westbrook runs a pretty amazing pick and pop with Serge Ibaka, who is killer from mid range and is still really good when he rolls to the hoop. What's the best strategy for defending that sort of play, which is presumably going to be pretty common when we look at that Oklahoma City offense against the Clipper D?
I think it's in many ways it's an opposite problem that they had with Golden State. Westbrook had a quote earlier this week that if they give him the open mid ranger on a pick and roll, he's going to hit them 9 out of 10 times. So he's not lacking confidence in that shot. The numbers disagree with him making 9 out of every 10. So whereas with Steph Curry, you're like, okay, don't let him shoot. Maybe you kind of switched around, played a little softer, and if the Thunder are going to beat you because Russell Westbrook goes 13 for 20 every night from 19 feet, fair enough. But I think letting him get into the lane, get the Clippers in foul trouble, which is potentially a big problem on the front line, both in terms of the big guys and Matt Barnes, because I'm not sure who else they have to throw at Durant that can do any sort of a job whatsoever. So letting Westbrook get into the lane would be a very bad thing. So I would expect to see much more of kind of whether it's DJ or Blake kind of drop into the elbow rather than blitzing the pick and roll, just because you really want to keep Westbrook on the outside rather than forcing him off the line like you would with Steph Curry.
Right. I think the Clippers could learn a lot by watching the way that Memphis defended them. Now, granted, Marc Gasol is just unbelievable in the pick and roll as a defender if you want him anchoring that defense. But Memphis they were going under screens and basically baiting Russell Westbrook into chucking up threes. And Seth, I know you mentioned it, like you'll let Russell Westbrook take that 19-footer. And yeah, if the Oklahoma City offense ends with Westbrook dribbling for 14 seconds and then chucking up a 19-footer, you're probably okay with that. That being said, I know it sounds counterintuitive because you don't want a guy chucking up. If you're a defense, you're happy with a guy chucking up maybe somewhat semi-contested mid-range shots over threes because the three is a more efficient shot. That said, I would almost rather bait Russell Westbrook into taking threes than letting him get to 18 feet. Because if you let him to get to 18 feet, once that guy gets ahead of steam, all of a sudden he can make a decision at the elbow to keep going. And that's not only how he starts to score and gets to the rim. That's how you get guys in foul trouble. That's when he distributes the best. That's when he's able to kick out to shooters. And granted, the Thunder are not very good from the corners. They don't really have corner three shooters. That's one of the reasons why I think Butler is in that. Caron Butler is in the lineup now. Shout out to Caron Butler, who's going to be playing, former Clipper, going to be playing against them now. but those corner threes aren't really going to kill him. But the Thunder are good on the driving kick, and that's one of the things that Westbrook is so good about. So once you kind of let him build a head of steam, probably more than any other point guard in the league, all of a sudden you're in trouble. And he can pull up, and he's actually pretty good on those pull up shots because he's got pretty amazing body control considering how fast he goes. I'd rather him take those threes. Like when he had that 4 for 13 game against Memphis from three. That was why granted, Durant, I think, didn't hit a three in that game, or maybe it was 1 for 8 from three or something as well. But, one of the reasons they lost that game, he was 21, he was 11 for 31 from the field, or 10 for 31 from the field, or whatever. The Thunder were just baiting him into those threes, and the Grizzlies were, and he'll take those threes. So I would almost rather him just taking those shots over anything else.
Yeah, no, and it's a similar thing. I mean, just I agree with you. You kind of, if whatever you're doing in the coverage to entice Westbrook to indulge in his confidence in his jump shot is probably the preferable way to guard kind of the high pick and roll for the next series.
Yeah, I mean it's basically the holding the carrot in front of his nose defense, right? That's all it is. That's all it. Or for me, holding the Twinkie in front of his nose defense. It's the same. That's how my mom gets me to run on treadmills. She just holds the Twinkie and sprint after it. That's why I haven't been on a treadmill since Hostess went out of business and done.
She didn't stock up beforehand? No?
No, unfortunately.
She's not buying Twinkies on eBay for $100 a case?
Is that a thing?
It was a thing when they announced they're like discontinuing them or something. That the price of Twinkies on eBay got it was like tulips in the Netherlands back in the day. So it was a bubble, a Twinkie bubble.
Aren't they not discontinued anymore? Didn't it come back?
I think so.
I thought it was like Converse and like Kodak film, Polaroid film, where like it disappears and then like some global corporation buys it and is just like, yeah, we'll keep making it.
Yeah.
So that's basically like so Twinkies going out of business was basically like more overhyped than Michael Jordan retiring, is what you're saying.
I don't know if I can't say factually that happened with Twinkies. I'm just saying that happened with other things, and I thought it happened with Twinkies. I bet you can find one, is what I'm saying, if you want one.
What?
So you heard it first on ClipperBlog Live. We think that Oklahoma City is soft like a Twinkie. I think that's what we're getting out of this conversation.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
That's not what we do. It's not what we think.
Or the offense is sweeter than a Twinkie. What is, Patrick, what is the aspect of this series that you're most looking forward to? Because everyone was really excited about Clippers Warriors. I think not just Clippers and Warriors fans. Like I think this was generally considered to be maybe the most hyped first round series. Clippers Thunder is definitely going to be the most hyped second round series. No matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what matchups we get, this is definitely going to be the most. This has the most star power, and it's just not even close. And it's going to have tons of highlights and great players. What is the matchup or just the aspect of the series that you think you're looking most forward to?
Well, looking most forward to is an interesting question. I mean, is Chris Paul healthy? And if so, what do you get in terms of Chris Paul versus Russell Westbrook? I kind of like Chris Paul's odds in a vacuum. I don't like it with Chris Paul injured. That said, I'm most interested in looking at how do Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan, having gone through this series, which granted they had an advantage most nights on paper in the post, what does this do for their confidence? What do they do going into this game? Because I feel like they still have an advantage on paper looking at if Kendrick Perkins is playing and if Serge Ibaka is playing. I'd rather have Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan than those two in a vacuum again. I don't know how that plays out, but those matchups are going to be really interesting. What happened? Steven Adams and Blake Griffin are both people that tend to get under other people's skin and or allow people to get under their skin. What's going to happen there? Who knows? I think there's a lot of stuff going on. Also, there's the best offensive player in basketball in the world to watch out for.
Yeah, interesting thing about Blake and DeAndre is kind of how do they react to playing quote unquote normal basketball again after playing kind of the very kind of the small ball spread out version, and this actually a little bit both ways almost for wow, that is a big mug. After Game 7, where Memphis had some success in the first half of that game, with kind of a very small lineup, and so both teams are going to be kind of getting back to playing normal basketball a little bit, and how that changes things. DeAndre kind of picking on someone his own size for the first time in 2 weeks. The other, I mean, the Chris Paul thing. I mean, right now Chris Paul is playing playoff hockey. I feel like he's got a bandage, he's got stitches. He's they're in the injury report that they're going to stop listing specific body parts. They're just going to say he's got a lower body injury, so that they don't know what on his body to target. Because he's got so many braces and patches and stuff going on right now. So you're right, going against a player as physical as Russell Westbrook is you do worry a little bit about if the pounding that's going to entail on him, and the other options are not exactly palatable. I don't really like the idea of what Russell Westbrook would do if Darren Collison, for example, guards him for long stretches. It doesn't strike me as a particularly advantageous matchup for the Clippers.
My eyes just bugged out of my head. The image of Darren Collison guarding Russell Westbrook, that doesn't sound like a pleasant experience. That's like the colonoscopy of the Clippers defense right there. It just sounds.
It's like that's just because of the matchup, but don't forget that at UCLA, Russell Westbrook rode the bench while Darren Collison started, and that was an issue because it was not the best move by Van Halen. So Russell Westbrook seems like the type of guy that doesn't forget that injustice and wants to make good on it every time he sees Darren Collison, would be my guess. Maybe that's not true, but that would be my guess.
That seems incredibly plausible. Actually, I didn't make that connection, but that's very true. So you heard it here first. Watch out for incredible Tyler Honeycutt plays in this series. It's gonna be huge. Why is Tyler Honeycutt not in the league? Where is he? Israel, right?
Are we gonna be playing UCLA Patino game now?
Wait,
Let's not.
Charles O'Bannon is not walking through that door. George Zedek is not walking through that door. What's that?
Nor will O'Bannon be wearing a hat with his likeness on it.
Yeah, it's fair.
Oh man, let's get out of this before we lose every viewer we have. That's going to do it for us. The Clippers defeat the Warriors in Game 7, 126-121 to win the series. And you heard it here first. Best Clipper win ever. Maybe. Game 1 against Oklahoma City is scheduled for 6:30 p.m. Pacific time Monday night. I'm not sure what channel that's going to be on, but I guess it's either TNT or ESPN likely, or ABC. So I guess any of the possible channels it could be on. For Patrick James and Seth Partnow, I'm Fred Katz. See you in round 2. Good night, everyone.